meeting to order. Just as a note of information, at two previous meetings, we received some chat messages, and the city attorney informed us that in a hybrid meeting such as this, comments must be made in the meeting. And so chat messages or emails sent during the meeting cannot be part of public record, nor can they be read during the meeting. Just wanted to make that clarifying point. We received note that Ann and Terrell requested excused absences. May I have a motion that we excuse Ann and Terrell? Mark moved. Second? Okay, KB second. All those in favor, say aye. Any opposition? Very good. You have the minutes from the May 5th meeting. We heard from Nicola that she just responded by updating her credentials. Her credentials were a bit off in the minutes. Were there any other corrections, additions that need to be made? Hearing none, may I have a motion that the minutes be received as amended by Nicola's credential comments. Mark moved. Is there a second? Okay, we got Luann on second. All those in favor? Aye. Raise your hand. Any opposition? Very good. We're now in the public comment section. Wayne, do we have anyone sign up?
No one has signed up for public comment. We've not received any emails.
Okay. So we move on to commissioner comments. We welcome Luann Phillips, who will take a couple of minutes to tell us about herself and maybe why she decided to be a part of SMAC.
Good afternoon.
Afternoon.
I thought I would tell you a little bit more about my role in various city planning endeavors. I think I mentioned in April, my first meeting, that my husband and I live in North Raleigh. I have two adult children that live in North Raleigh and a granddaughter who's in first grade at Lynn Road Elementary, about to be a proud second grader. My undergraduate degree was in geography, and that was many years ago. And that was when GIS systems were first being developed. And so I had an opportunity to work on some really early versions. Nothing like we have today, but that gave me kind of an appreciation for what we have today and what we can do with it. I then went directly to graduate school at Ohio State, got a master's in city and regional planning. While I was there, I worked during the year and summers for the city of Columbus. And I was a neighborhood planner, and I was assigned to two downtown neighborhoods in Columbus and worked with the city, the community leaders, at some public events and things like that, and helped them develop their plan for how they wanted to develop as a neighborhood. I then worked in Prince William County, Virginia. It's the county just past Fairfax County. And they at the time were experiencing lots of growth, rapid growth, having a hard time dealing with it. I did the population estimates. We would look at building permits. We would try to anticipate what was coming to the county. And then for a short time, I did do rezoning reviews and recommendations. So that gave me flavor for some of the rezoning. I then moved to Prince George's County, which is a DC suburb in Maryland. And there I did long-range facility planning. And so helping it was the school board, police and fire departments, and libraries I was assigned to help them think 10, 15 years out what they needed. They actually had some neighborhoods where population was declining, and then we had neighborhoods where it was growing, so helping put all that together. And that was a time when I worked with a team to put together a public impact fee. So large developers could donate land to build a school, but smaller developers, we developed a system where they could contribute to a fund, and that could be used to support public services that were needed, more schools and parks and recreation. So then I lived in Texas for 2 years. My husband was transferred. I was on the planning commission for the city of Wichita Falls, and that's right on the border between, it's north of Dallas, about 2 hours, right on the border of Texas and Oklahoma. There's an Air Force base there. There's Midwestern State University. So I served on the planning commission for two years, and there the challenge was really a lot of affordable housing, a lot of growth, a lot of economic issues, companies coming and going, just some real kind of economic issues for the cities. So that's my background. I did then venture into human resources and retired from the state. I worked at several state departments, Department of Treasurer, public instruction. I worked at UNC Chapel Hill for a while. And I retired in 2019. And I wanted to get involved and saw this on social media, apply, and I'm really excited to get to know the staff and to work with all of you.
Thank you, Luann. Our planning commission SMAC liaison, Nicola.
Yeah, sure. So I just want to give a quick update on one of the developments that I presented or kind of mentioned at the last meeting. So one of them was, it was the 517 Buck Jones Road. So it was, I think Z1122 was the actual number of that, kind of reference information. So this was the development that is in the Walnut Creek watershed, and it's just it's quite a little bit upstream from an area that's frequently impacted by flooding. And so in that, the actual development was presented to the board, to the planning commission, excuse me, and with a few modifications that they can kind of have conditions that would help hopefully mitigate or remediate some of those future stormwater issues if it was to be developed. A quick status update on that, just kind of giving some context. The quick status update was that the kind of voluntary conditions that they submitted, they went to currently the actual application is deferred for future decision if it's going to be accepted, granted or not, and kind of hopefully in the next month or so until they actually reevaluate it. Some of those voluntary conditions will be reevaluated, hopefully clarified to make sure that the understanding of what those conditions could be and kind of actual measures and measurable outcomes can be there. So that's just a quick update. Again, you can add me more detail there than update, but looking forward to kind of continuing tracking that progress. And it is kind of fun areas, making sure those conditions are in place are quite important. Questions or?
Thank you. Wayne.
All right, I do have some team updates from the stormwater team. We have some new additions and some promotions we'd like to announce that we're very excited about. First, we have Kendall Epler has assumed the position as a senior engineer on our plan review group. She's going to work very closely with Sally Hoyt in the role of GSI advocate. So give Sally some support on GSI issues, as well as being the lead reviewer on City of Raleigh projects as well. Kendall is a professional engineer, 6 years of experience, coming to us from a consulting firm where she worked on both land development, water resources projects with experience in GSI already, stormwater control, measure design, stream restoration, and flood studies. So she has a bachelor's degree in engineering and mathematics from James Madison University. So great hire for us. Sean Eggleston has been promoted in the same group. He has been an engineer in plan review, being promoted to the senior engineer plan review. So that fills both of the vacancies we had in the senior plan review group. Sean joined the city in 2019 and has a bachelor's in environmental engineering from Lehigh University. He has spent 10 years as an engineer for Talbot County Department of Public Works in Maryland, working on stormwater and civil engineering projects, and also served as the stormwater administrator for the city of Lenoir, North Carolina, from 2015 to 2019. So another good promotion on our team. A few more. Lori Tanner is a newly hired engineering specialist in stormwater business services. She brings 7 years of experience in customer care, billing, and accounting from the private sector. And she'll be supporting our utility fee group in day-to-day billing operations, technical customer support, and overall support to the team. So we're very excited to have Lori on board. Another promotion, Heather Dutra, who's here today, has recently been promoted to the water quality manager position. Heather has 17 years of experience in watershed protection and restoration, 10 years leading NPDES permit related work in phase 1 communities in Maryland and North Carolina. And previously, you may recall, she supervised our water quality project development, which included our volunteer programs and stream monitoring, and managed design of GSI projects. She presented SMAC on that. She graduated from University of Virginia in environmental science and maintains professional certifications in project management and arboriculture. And then last but certainly not least, Kaylee Best is here with us today as well. She's a new intern in the fee accounts group, so she'll be working closely with Matt Hunt, with Allison McGarity and Lori Tanner, who I just mentioned. Kaylee is a junior in environmental engineering at East Carolina University, so we're very happy to have Kaylee on board as well. So thank you. That's all the updates I had for the team. If I may, I didn't have any topics a week ago when I printed the agenda, but some real quick minor issues. Yesterday was the official start of hurricane season, June 1st. And so we're closely tracking those. There's some activity right now that we're keeping an eye on. Also related, commission members may see this little piece of cardboard. We had an opening event yesterday that coincided with the first day of hurricane season at our alluvial decoder floodplain educational display, which is located on the Crabtree Greenway, near the mall, under the Blue Ridge Road Bridge, and then extending toward Glenwood Avenue. And if you haven't stopped by there, I'd encourage you to stop by. It's a permanent display that has poles that, and we've described this previously, that represent the different elevations of storms. And this is a key that you can bring with you, although there is also a key mounted permanently under the bridge. So if you haven't been there, stop by, I would encourage it. And we've gotten a lot of good coverage, and believe it's generating a lot of good discussion, which is exactly our point, to get the point across of floodplain management. But flooding has risks to the community. So we want to have those dual messages of importance of floodplain management, as well as expressing the dangers of being in flood prone areas during heavy storm events. So the only other item, and I didn't know if you wanted to cover it here, Mr. Chair, or maybe at the end under other business about the July meeting date.
Yeah, we can do that under other business.
Okay, that was great. Thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you, Wayne. I invite Justin forward, who will talk about the tree preservation UDO tax change.
Thank you, Wayne. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Commission members. Good afternoon. My name is Justin Rometta. I'm with the Planning and Development Department in the city. And so part of the role that my team and I play is updating the Unified Development Ordinance. It's the document that contains the bulk of the city's development regulations. From time to time, that document gets updated, rules change. And so I'm here to talk with you all and solicit your feedback and about one of those proposed changes, which is what we're calling TC2-22. It's related to tree preservation and planting. I've got just kind of a three-part presentation for you today. I just want to preface it by saying this is a presentation we've given to several boards and commissions throughout the city to date. So if there's something I talk about that's overly technical or you don't understand, I'm happy to clarify or answer questions. I'm also joined by some colleagues in Parks, Recreation, and Cultural Resources, Zach Manor and Chris Trump, who can answer specific detailed questions about the somewhat complex and detailed tree conservation rules we have today. Likewise, if I go over something that you all are already familiar with, I apologize in advance. Like I said, this is a presentation for several boards with kind of different areas of focus throughout the city. So I'm going to talk about three main items here. One is kind of give an overview of our existing regulatory and statutory framework that we're kind of working in with this text change, and then go into some of the specifics of what we're thinking at this point. We are very early on in this process. Typically, what we do is we write legislation or propose changes, and then we put them out for comment. Knowing the broad interest throughout the city in trees and tree conservation, for this one, we've decided to come out up front a little bit and get some feedback before we actually start even putting anything on paper. And so that's where we are today. I've got some concepts to share with you, but not a whole lot of detail and a whole lot of specifics at this point. And then we'll talk about some next steps. So I want to start by going over some state legislation. So the city of Raleigh, just like all local governments in North Carolina, are bound in what we can regulate by what the state tells us we can do. And we can only regulate what the state explicitly gives us authority to do. And so that authority is pretty consistent throughout jurisdictions throughout the state, although the city does have some unique legislation that is specific to us when it comes to tree planting preservation. One of those is the Session Law from 1985 that allows us to regulate the planting, maintenance, removal, replacement, grading, and preservation on public and private property of the following trees on that list there. And there's a specific list of champion and co-champion trees, which we'll talk a little bit more about in a second. Those on historic property, any species that are designated by the city council to be endangered, threatened, or of special concern, and then those listed as protected by the Plant Conservation Board. And that law also gives us the authority to regulate areas such as floodways, steep slopes, reservoir watershed protection areas, which we'll talk a little bit more about, and resource management zoning districts, which we'll talk a little bit more about as well. In 2001, another law was passed that gave us some more authority, and that allows the city to regulate trees basically along the perimeter of lots. So it gives us the ability to regulate within 65 feet of roadways, the property boundaries that's adjacent to property that's developed, and 32 feet along property that's adjacent to undeveloped property. This law also gave the city the authority to regulate the removal and preservation of significant specimen or champion trees, which is important, and we'll come back to later. That says it's that counts. I did just want to touch on champion or co-champion tree. I don't know if you're all familiar with these terms or not. Just wanted to point out that it is a very, it is a defined term. It's very narrowly defined. And so it's typically understood to be the largest individual tree of a certain species within a specific geographical area as designated by those associations that you speak the board. It's my understanding that there may be a handful of these in Wake County as a whole. And so while we have the authority to regulate their removal and protect them, it doesn't really do a whole lot to move the needle in terms of providing more tree canopy or saving more tree canopy in the city. So I just wanted to point that out. And so, given that existing state law, the city's regulations kind of carry that out in one of three ways. One are what's called our tree conservation rules. And those rules are about saving existing trees, including those champion trees, basically in all sites that are being developed that are larger than 2 acres in size. We have forestation requirements. These apply only in the 3 water supply watershed areas throughout the city. And they require a lot to have a certain percentage of forestation that can be either saved trees or planted trees. And then we have what are called transition and protected yards. These are kind of zoning buffers. The common example is between a commercial and a residential use, or uses that might not be compatible, where you've got to plant or preserve a strip of vegetation as well. So there are some other areas, and I'll talk about each three of these in a little bit more of detail. But these are the main ways in which the city kind of implements its goals of tree planting and preservation. So a little bit more about tree conservation. Again, like I said, it applies when sites that are 2 acres and larger are either being subdivided or developed in some other way. It requires typically that 10% of your site size be saved, of the trees be saved. It does bump up to 15% in some of our really low residential districts, or R1 and R2 districts, but usually there isn't a lot of that land area throughout the city's jurisdiction. There is a very specific, hierarchy. There's primary and secondary tree conservation areas, and a very specific hierarchy that lays out the way you go about determining which trees on the site need to be saved. And like I said, these rules are really crafted to save existing stands of healthy trees. You cannot meet your tree conservation burden by planting trees. This is solely about saving existing trees on your site. This is some images, the orange tree protection fence that you may have seen throughout the city, delineating sites that are being developed and the tree conservation areas that are in them. And then just some examples of some plan sheets that developer might submit for review to the city on a site that's being developed that has trees on it. Okay, so the forestation requirements, again, they apply in 3 water supply watershed areas. It is a significant requirement in that 40% of the lot area has to be forested. And the difference here with TCA is that you can preserve existing trees. You can also plant trees to meet that requirement if you don't have existing trees on site, and you are required to do so. And of course, we have minimum species and size requirements for trees that are planted to meet the forestation requirements. I'm sure you're all very familiar with these, but these are just the 3 water supply watersheds within the city. On the top right, you have the Richland Creek, which we call the Urban Watershed Protection Overlay District. The bottom right there in green is Swift Creek, and bottom left is the portion of Falls Lake that's in the city's jurisdiction. So these are the areas where that 40% forestation requirement applies. And then again, transitional protected yards, really a zoning kind of buffer between uses that might not be compatible with each other. This can be met like forestation through planting, preservation, or some combination of both. And again, there are minimum requirements for, we do say what trees can satisfy those requirements as well. And as I mentioned, there are a few other areas throughout the code that have to deal with landscaping and planting. There's a couple other overlay districts we have, where called zoning frontages. Of course, the parking lots have to be landscaped to a certain extent, but the 3 areas I just mentioned are where we get the bulk of our tree planting requirements that come in through a development process. Okay, so that brings us to where we are with this proposed text change. And the city council has asked planning and development staff and park staff to look at opportunities where we can either expand the existing rules or potentially even fill in some gaps to kind of get what they, to use their words, more better trees throughout the city of Raleigh, right? Quantity and quality. And so one example of an area that we've identified as been lacking and that members of the community often see as lacking is when small infill sites are being developed or redeveloped inside the belt line or other smaller lots throughout the city, where they may not be large enough to trip those pre-conservation rules, but there may be some large stately trees on site that folks are very rightly so upset about when they're cut down as part of the development process. And kind of further that, there is no kind of replanting requirement that's in place today for folks to replant when they do have to take those trees down. So that's one example of what we might try to address with this text change. So back in February, we went to city council and they kind of gave us some broad direction in how we could start crafting these rules to address their concerns. And so they gave us direction to do four things. One was to explore just taking the existing tree conservation rules and taking that 2 acre threshold and just dropping that down to 1, taking the same rules and applying them to lots that are 1 acre and greater size instead of 2 acres. They asked us to explore some significant specimen tree provisions to kind of address that example that I just gave, where sites that may not be subject to the full tree conservation rules may have some really significant and important trees on site that might be valuable for us to try and protect. And then exploring some type of planting requirement for smaller lots, even under 1 acre potentially, where all lots throughout the city potentially have to have a tree or some amount of tree coverage on their site. And then the resource management zoning district, they kind of say that it isn't part of this text change. It is something they kind of kept in their pocket for future exploration, but I will talk a little bit more about that over the next few slides too. So just looking at each one of those in a little bit of detail. Again, really just, option 1 here is just take the existing tree conservation rules and apply them to 1 acre and greater lots. And so in looking at that, here's kind of why that might be something that really does move the needle in terms of tree canopy. Basically what this chart is showing is the potential for, in the bottom right there, you see nearly 600 extra acres of available land covered by trees if the city were to simply just say these rules apply at 1 acre or larger instead of 2 acres or larger. Obviously, these are just raw numbers. They would be not exact, and you have to factor in other things that go on to a development site, but pretty impactful number just looking at that for a somewhat simple change. And then again, the specimen tree would really be about identifying what the city thinks are significant trees and what trees are valuable to the city. Some type of oak trees for the city of a certain size that the city could protect and kind of give some additional protection to when they're not subject to those tree conservation rules. Recognizing that smaller infill sites are tight, you have to have room for stormwater devices and parking, even though we don't require parking anymore. Developers are going to still provide parking and setbacks, building envelopes, all those other things you got to squeeze on a site. The smaller it gets. We understand the trees might need to be removed sometime, even significant trees. But in that case, perhaps we could implement some type of replanting requirement that's either on a 1-to-1 or 1 to greater basis if you have to take down those trees and require removal, whereas today, again, if you're not subject to those tree conservation rules, you're not required to save any tree sites. The resource management zoning district, again, this is something the council decided to postpone for now. It is a tool that does kind of give us broader authority and ability to do some more than what we are allowed to do under that existing enabling legislation we went over at the beginning. The downside to that is it does require rezoning properties, so we're required to rezone hundreds or potentially thousands of properties put into these resource management zoning districts, and then write the rules that would apply in those districts. So given that and the fact that the city has some ongoing initiatives, including the tree canopy study that Wood County is leading and the urban heat island projects, those 2 ongoing initiatives, data that comes out of those also might help inform in the future where the city might want to implement those resource management zones and what rules might apply in those. So for those reasons, it's kind of on the back burner for now, but I did just want to point it out as something that we'll probably be exploring in the future. This is just a map, an example of the urban heat island mapping project. I'm sure some of you are familiar with it, but the city does have a website. You can just search urban heat and you can pull up that interactive map and all the information about the project there if you're interested. Okay, so that's kind of the broad initial approach that we're taking. Our next steps are to talk to several more boards and commissions like yourselves, stakeholders. We're here today seeking your feedback. Interested in hearing any just reactions to what I've told you today. If anything you think makes sense that we might be proposing, if anything doesn't make sense, or things that we're not even thinking about. Happy to answer any questions you might have, or just take your feedback. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate your time. Just real quick for next steps. So as I mentioned, this is a little bit of a unique process for us where we're getting this feedback on the front end. But once we take your feedback and put something on paper and put draft rules in place, we do put that out for public consumption on our website. It's called a text change portal. And we put all our draft text changes on there for public comments. You can reach out to me directly. I can give you my contact information. Once it's on that website, it goes through the public process where the planning commission does review it and they make changes. They may make revisions, but ultimately they make a recommendation to city council, and ultimately city council will hold a public hearing as to whether they want to adopt the rules or not. All throughout that whole process, those are all public meetings. There's opportunity for public comment throughout all those. So again, thank you, and happy to answer any questions you might have.
I've got two questions.
Okay.
The first one, I guess I'm curious, the data that is collected for the champion trees within the city, is that shared with the Forest Service, or are they the gatekeepers of that information?
You want to take that one?
Sure, my name's Specimen, Raleigh Parks. So those are tracked by the state and federal government. I think there's 5 in Raleigh, 4 of them are at the Arboretum. So it's kind of a cheater champion tree because it's from another place, but it's just big in place. So, yeah, they're tracked by the federal government and the state.
So you guys share that information, there's a master database somewhere?
Yes, yeah, the state maintains a website where you can locate trees for every county in North Carolina and see where.
And I guess the second question was in regard to the tree, the actual area that would be saved. I guess you mentioned 10% of the lot area. Is that like a buffer from those particular trees? Is that how that's 10% of
So
the lot size?
the existing tree conservation rules, I'm sure Zach will weigh in, correct me if I'm wrong here. You're taking 10% of the lot size, and that's the amount that has to be saved. You have to save at least 10% of your lot in terms of existing healthy trees that meet the requirements of what tree conservation has to be.
He nailed it. Happy to provide some more depth.
Yeah, I said a kind of clarifying question on, we're talking about lot size every year. A lot of times we're, the initial one, I believe, is kind of over, 2 acres plus, the kind of higher number. And I guess what I'm thinking about, even kind of normal neighborhoods right now, you have some of those older, smaller homes and these larger lots, they redevelop it into 2 different lots. So when we're talking about 2 acres, was that the original, or, dropping it down to maybe 1 acre, to fit those future developments? Is that the future developments 1 acre each, or is that the original lot size? So I think that would kind of.
It's the original lot size. So,
Okay.
so today, if you've got a 1.9 acre lot and you're gonna subdivide it into 2 lots, you're not subject to the rules. If you have a 2.01 acre lot that you're gonna subdivide it into, you are subject.
Got it. Yeah, so I just wanted to see if you divided it, then you would be able to.
Yeah, you don't get off the hook for subdividing.
Thanks for clarifying.
Yeah, I'm pretty supportive of the current tree protection ordinance. I actually worked with my attorneys when we did the 40% for the watershed supply watersheds. But I'm also kind of opposed to creating regulations unless we really need regulations, especially when we're getting down to 1 or 2 acre lots. We may have individual homeowners facing this stuff. The tree conservation ordinance is going to be pretty complex. I mean, you got to bring in a urban forester and a surveyor to figure out all of that stuff. It's going to be a big expense for a single family homeowner. So I was curious in that development of the less than 2 acre properties, how many of those are single family residential? How many of those are commercial? Who's this going to impact? if we move forward with regulating down to smaller lots.
We haven't broken it down to that level of detail quite yet. As far as that's easily done, right? We can calculate out the number of residential zone parcels versus the number of mixed use parcels that are 1 acre or larger. But we haven't done that today.
And I'm also concerned, I know other communities I've worked with, there's ongoing battles between tree preservation and people trying to implement solar heat, solar electricity and so on. You know, and they've got big existing trees that need to come out so they can put in solar panels. Whether or not we can put some sort of exemption or adjustment for that, where, okay, we can take those out, we have to plant more, we're going to compensate for that kind of thing. For people to try and be good environmentally from that perspective. That's why I'm looking at. I'm
Maybe
looking for
providing-
creating more burden on properties than anything else.
So maybe look at opportunities for some incentives or some flexibility if you're doing something like solar.
I think I add on to what Mark said. I believe 15 years ago, 20 years ago, whatever, you know, the 2 acre mark may have been set so it didn't burden a lot of single family homeowners, you know, some kind of thing that, something where you didn't want to start to trigger a lot of angst in, you know, folks. So it is a little interesting to go to 1 acre. Of course, we see it all the time. It's what's happening now. Has there been a thought process? If you go down to 1 acre, does it conflict with the city's goals of the missing middle? Because, you know, the challenge of tree conservation, which we all know is good, is it's very prescriptive, right? There are 8 ways, 9 ways, and then you get together the secondary. So I see some language in here about the idea that there's alternatives, but when you get to the 1 acre flexibility, besides the specimen or champion tree that's designated as such, would be nice, because you're going to start to really restrict the ability, I believe, for the city to get to where they want to get to with this missing middle. If you start to say 50 feet here, 30 feet there, the length has to be 20 feet by 32, you know, some of the minimums. So just thinking through the technicalities of how it's applied, I think would be an interesting case study to look through that on an acre lot.
Yeah, it's good feedback, and we've heard it initially from others as well. Is how do you meet those competing goals, or how do you prevent the goals of having more trees competing with the goals for housing affordability? I did want to point out that as far as, you know, heard about single family lot owners, single family homeowners, existing tree conservation rules don't apply to you if you're just building a house or a homeowner that wants to put a deck on their house or an addition or accessory structure in the yard. They really kick into play if you're splitting your lot, they do come into play, or if you're doing a more kind of intense type of site plan. But there is already exemption baked in for single family homes.
Back to the reforestation thing, and the planting thing that we've done reforestation, Mark has noted. I don't believe there's anything in the regulation that requires those trees to live. So if there were a way to tighten that up to ensure there's no easement on those properties either, like TCA, so it's just it's just put them in a 10-foot grid and walk away. So it's a thing that, you know, it'd be interesting to kind of go back and if you're looking at protecting the watersheds, and there's a way to do that.
So I believe they record it as a wooded area. It isn't as specific as a tree conservation area, so theoretically it needs to be maintained as a wooded area in perpetuity, but I would agree that it isn't something that traditionally people notice. You know, oftentimes tree conservation area, we get a lot of phone calls about, we don't get as many about the watershed plantings. So, yeah, it's good feedback as well.
I just wanted to add on the kind of homeowner cost or that kind of component. And I, again, kind of my ignorance on the kind of development scene and what's going on fully there. But it's a lot of the developments I've seen are by the same kind of development companies, not necessarily a single. I'm not sure who would like bear the part of that cost there, but I would think there'd be some economies of scale with a developer being able to develop 10 houses at once and have that kind of resource. So I think kind of adding in potentially that that component to this, if you are going to do a study about what the costs and just kind of keeping that into account, that a lot of it would just be on the, maybe it does get trickled down to an individual homeowner when they're purchasing, but a lot of that would weigh the cost would be a little bit lot less so, since it is kind of economies of scale, and a lot of it's done by larger development things.
I was wondering if you guys could do
No, go ahead.
I'd be curious to see a sort, like a GIS sort of the lots that are exempt. Of the city's lots, how many are single family homes and what area where none of these things apply? I'm just thinking I live in a neighborhood, half acre or less lots, and I assume none of this stuff applies in the neighborhood. And just see how the city shapes out that way. I think you had a stat that there were 600 acres maybe saved out of a large number of acres. Yeah, 100,000. And so I'm just curious. I really like trees, just as a full disclosure. Was just arguing with my wife about cutting down this big magnolia in our front yard. But anyway, I think that mapping would give a good perspective of the impact.
Yeah, we could look into some mapping like that. The one challenge is that, lot sizes and site sizes change, so, there's nothing to say that your neighborhood, in 15 or 20 years, someone could assemble, 6 or 10 of those single family lots, and perhaps the zoning might allow, some type of apartment or multifamily project or
Yeah.
what have you. And at that stage, now you are subject, right? Because you've assembled, these lots, and now you're over that threshold. So it's fluid.
Right.
We could provide a static picture, but, just a disclaimer that.
Could you talk a little bit more then about the 600 out of 100,000 acre, that stat, what?
Yeah, that was simply just taking all of the area that's outside of the watershed, of the watershed. So we took all land area outside of the watershed because we know that's already subject to 40%, right, from the forestation rules. And then, we found the total acreage that's between 1 and 2 acres that is not subject today, but would be with this proposed change. And that leads you to 593 potential additional tree conservation that's out there.
But I guess then to that end, it'd be great to see another column of the other areas that we were talking. Just, yeah, keep it simple.
So this grid, so that's 600th of 1% difference. From where you stand as a subject matter expert, is that significant?
I think in terms of one component, right, of one text change, talking about furthering goals, we feel like it is significant in terms of both just sheer number of acres, and also there's kind of a simplicity, beautiful simplicity in it too, and that it doesn't take an entire rewrite or rethinking of our code. We have it in place, right? We can just change, okay, now these rules apply here, and it doesn't take a lot of effort. So we feel like it's a big gain for pretty minimum.
Okay.
And I think that's why council asked us to explore that option.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see it's a big burden on staff side and the regulatory side. I just see there's a potential large burden on the developer side. And does the problem justify that solution and that additional burden? Kind of question, how much you have to quantify that. I think this tries to get there. Like Reverend Taylor said, for 1/10 of 1% to create a whole, a new burden for the development community, depending on who that is, whether it's commercial or residential, and all the other rules that we already face, like was pointed out, they get painted into a corner from all the other requirements to take away land that's developable. We should pull some more out of that and create an additional burden.
So one question
we as the group obviously are interested in green stormwater infrastructure and promoting GSI. You know, in all of the tree-related ordinances, are there any hindrances to trees that are incorporated as part of GSI, like a bioretention area may have trees, or, you know, silva-cells have stormwater detention built around the trees? Is there enough flexibility for that kind of tree to count as the replanting in the tree areas that you might consider to meet your requirements?
I'm interested to hear what Zach has to say. I'll just say, we haven't gotten quite that far as to what would actually qualify as a replanting tree. The hindrance or the burden of the existing code obviously is it can't be tree conservation because you can't plant to meet that requirement. So it can't be tree conservation. Whether or not it could satisfy some type of replanting requirement or planting requirement or site, I think certainly could. But like I said, we haven't gotten quite that far yet.
Yeah, I don't think it would work specifically as a tree conservation area because of how restrictive they are as a stormwater device. It's an active device specifically. And so tree conservation is a little more geared toward full conservation over time. Now, I think we look at all the options for what other kind of planting requirements exist on a property and looking at a replanting option as being able to count. I think one of the delineations would be the right of way versus property. We're always pretty open to still cells in the right of way and we'll pick them kind of when they come, but that's a little different from the conservation piece.
Been any conversation about the green GSI kind of thing, that the ability to get on a different track kind of is money to people, and kind of going back to Mark's idea that, you know, this may be perceived as a additional burden for those trying to build housing in the city or do something unique in a smaller scale. Is there a way that a hybrid, you know, TCA is placed, you know, on the 1 acre lots, but yet you get, you know, you kind of get to go into the low impact track or something like that, or 15%. I'm just trying to figure out a middle ground there or some kind of carrot for folks to go and do. I mean, 10 to 15% on the site is completely, I think it's logical. It's just when you get down to 1 acre, describing where it goes is absolutely going to be a challenge. And you'll have blowback across the city on this. And so if there's a way to kind of make it a carrot, would be maybe a better path. So.
I think we've talked a little bit about if you're talking about a heritage or larger tree, giving that double count towards tree conservation requirements. For the way tree conservation is kind of set up now, it's generally geared as areas of trees as a priority. As we get on smaller lots, maybe it's more of a significant tree kind of favored, like shifting around a bit the prioritization of the order.
Right.
So in a scenario, if you have just one big tree versus 10%, if that one big tree is 5%, maybe that meets your requirement by preserving that. So we're kind of looking at lots of different options in that. And that's really kind of why we're coming out on this as well, is to hear some of these sort of outside the box things that may not necessarily occur, but that's part of what we're looking at, incentivizing whatever wants.
That's helping the drivers, there's more loss of the big important trees, significant trees that the council's concerned about, as opposed to, 10%. Looking at that, 1 or 2 big trees on a 1 or 2 acre site to get mowed down and put in a quad or something like that. We can't control at this point.
And I think that addition of the possibility of planting gives that increased flexibility, because there are cases when you can't preserve that big tree and what's the right scale of replanting, right? So kind of looking at those things and figuring out what makes the sense to kind of provide the flexibility when possible.
So I have one more just kind of logistical question. How do you actually calculate the area of the tree? Is it for an existing tree? I assume it's the canopy. If it's any replanting or, are you assuming some future canopy of a mature tree, or how does that really work from a practical standpoint?
So for our tree area, we define that through the critical root zone. And the way the city defines that is 1.25 feet per inch of diameter. So if you think a 10-inch tree would have a 12.5-foot radius. So if you think about that in terms of a perfect circle, right? So that area is what we consider coverage. Trees are just like people. a 40-inch tree here and a 40-inch tree there may have a completely different canopy based on what it grew up around. So we do less above ground theoretically and use to try to make it as consistent as possible, looking at that critical zone. There's some variations we've discussed between a tree for a tree or replacing a certain percentage. A 40-inch tree may require 5 trees to be replanted or something along those lines. So there's a bit of a mix, and kind of different experts say you should plant more seedlings. Other experts say you should plant more 3-inch trees. So typically most of our replanting requirements that currently exist with forestation are depending on the size of the tree. So if it's a 2-inch tree, you plant less per acre than you would on 1-inch tree.
It's complex.
Any more questions for Justin? So there are a couple of options. One, Justin will take our comments and integrate them into his larger report that will eventually make its way to council. We do also have the option, if we wanted to pass some type of statement, not in lieu of his report, but as supplemental material to go to council, we could do that as well. So I didn't know if there was energy around a second, passing some type of official statement to accompany his report.
I think it makes sense for us to explicitly endorse GIS smart or GIS friendly tree standards.
Okay.
So I don't know what that looks like, but I think it makes sense for us to express that to council or endorse the recommendations for something along those lines.
Okay. Thank you for that, David. Any reflections or thoughts on that? Just waiting on Mark.
I think they have a phrase or include something there, but, you know, some sort of statement that, you know, as part of the consideration of amending the tree conservation ordinance or the tree ordinances, that they consider the impacts and the city council's directive to make use of green stormwater infrastructure and water quality protection in general, that whatever is pursued, that's considered so it doesn't hinder those efforts somehow. I don't know how to word that, but just to make sure that's a consideration in the deliberations of the ordinance development if they move forward.
Okay. Thoughts on that?
I mean, yeah, that's fine. I don't know if we need to state it, but I mean, obviously trees are great for, I mean, we understand the value of preserving the trees and, you know, and from stormwater management, from our perspective, stormwater management, you know, the existing tree canopy and the root systems are incredible value to the city. And you know, let me state that well, the city meets its other goals as well. Some acknowledgement of our specific understanding of the situation.
I'm looking at Wayne, you've heard 2 comments, reaction.
I'd be glad to make a crafted kind of a response statement, trying to incorporate some of the considerations that I've heard here from members today and put that out for comment, if you think that would be helpful. You know, I guess maybe a question for Justin and Zach as to when that would be, obviously be more helpful as you're crafting, but would it still be helpful, you know, if we just passed it until later on at a future SMAC meeting, just from a support standpoint?
Yeah, I think we've been taking some notes and we can just use your kind of an informal response to get started with and start compiling that feedback. But if you want to wait till your next meeting and formally vote or adopt something, I think that'd be great too. And whenever you do that, then we can forward that official statement or stance or response to council at that time.
I think we have another similar meeting at the end of June with the planning commission, so we're still sort of on the tour, so I would say, as we haven't really gotten to the language draft yet, that's still in time.
Yeah.
For anything official.
Now, okay, yeah.
Is there a clear, expectation for collecting that sort of information when work is being done before it's being developed? To collect those issues like temperatures, the people.
I'm not sure I understand.
So if they come across a changing tree, they're doing a natural resource assessment of the site. Right? For it to be captured. I mean, is that a known process to kind of be able to capture those trees?
Specific to champion trees, I think you have to make a request to say, I think I have a champion tree. And then someone from the state would send you a form and then they would come out and measure. So typically it's not it's more of a reactive response to, hey, I got this giant tree in my backyard, I think it might be a champion. It's kind of how that goes as opposed to a typical sort of discovery for tree conservation where they do an inventory of some of the trees on site. That is.
So I would support passing a motion at this meeting, even if it's somewhat vague, and then having staff supplement. I think our bylaws allow for that. Is that? What's the feeling? So I want to capture the energy of this moment. Because I know you will be presenting to council sometime in August, right?
Probably, not to council at that point. It's possible it could be, could have something in the planning commission by then. Yeah.
So why don't we do that? David and Mark and y'all were ping ponging back and forth. You gave some more detail. Do you mind restating what you said?
And I think what I was driving at was that whatever is pursued, if they decide to pursue an ordinance change, that it's taken into consideration council's directive to pursue green infrastructure, making sure that whatever ordinance is pursued, that it doesn't hinder and hopefully enhances those green infrastructure efforts. You know, as Wayne indicated, bioretention areas and so on are part of that, and making sure that if credit can be given for vegetation within those bioretention areas, that it's given credit. I know there was a time when stormwater devices such as bioretention couldn't be used as buffer areas and things like that, and that kind of got changed through work with staff, making sure that something like that doesn't conflict.
Okay. I want to receive that as a motion. So may I have that motion?
So
Okay, is there, moved by David, is there a second? Second by Mark, all those in favor, raise your hand. Any opposition? Fantastic. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
I now invite, the first Justin that I know from, to come forward to talk about, MS4.
Yes, thanks for letting me wear a different hat for once in front of you guys. Talk to you about what my primary role, and is to work in the MS4 world, the programs that support permit compliance for the city of Raleigh. It's a world of acronyms, interpretation, enforcement, all of these things mixed in, a lot of players. Truthfully though, it is a driver. Our MS4 permit is a driver for most of the things that we do. Our engagement with SMAC is, you could point to a part in our permit as a permit requirement of this. So it's a very important part of why we exist, and it's kind of hidden in the background. So just know that going through. Also, kind of a disclaimer at the beginning, and I've joked with several folks today about how to lead with this, but a 30-minute presentation on the MS4 world is like a tour of Europe in 30 minutes. So, or a tax code presentation in 30 minutes. So I'm gonna do my best to hit the high marks. I know Wayne has been doing teasers the last couple of meetings, saying what's going on back at the, back on the home front. And, you know, talk about what we've done prior to our audit that we just completed. And, you know, he wanted me to pretty much summarize to you guys, report out what we've accomplished over the last approximately 2 years. So without further ado, go ahead and get started. So I broke the presentation into 4 sections. I'm gonna do a really quick intro of what an MS4 permit is. We have some new folks to the commission, and we have a few seasoned veterans who've been around the MS4 world. We're gonna go over a quick gap analysis that we conducted 2 years ago to identify some compliance gaps we had, and a stormwater management plan update that was completed. We're going to talk about what we did, or I'm going to discuss what we did to fill those compliance gaps. And then I'm going to touch on the NCDEQ audit, which just was completed since I was last before y'all in the paper. So a quick introduction to the MS4 permit. This slide, you could unpack this for the next 30 minutes. But, you know, just to start out with, what is an MS4 permit or NPDES MS4 permit? It is authorized by the Clean Water Act. EPA is the authority nationwide. You know, they have delegated authority to NCDEQ. So they are the sheriff in North Carolina. They have the authority from EPA to issue permits, renew permits, audit, review stormwater plans, annual reports. You know, they are our point of contact, and then they answer to the EPA. Municipal separate storm sewer system. That is what the MS4 is. I guess what it's not might be another way of looking at it. It is not privately owned. It's a publicly owned storm water system that is not affiliated with a sewer treatment plant. So it's municipally owned stormwater system that discharges to waters in North Carolina. So how the EPA, and with the help of their delegated authorities, have rolled this out over the years, is they broke it up into phases. And it's one thing that's easily named is phase 1 and phase 2. Phase 1 are all your big cities, you know, all of your larger population cities. We had 6. This is 1990 timeframe. You had 6. The best on top there. All 6 stepped up, had to be issued these permits and then begin meeting those permit requirements. Around 2006, phase 2 came on board, and they've been, we have obviously a lot more phase 2s. One unique takeaway about North Carolina is that some states have a general permit that they hand out to all their municipalities. Same permit, same language and all of them. North Carolina, all of those permits are individual permits. They're all individual. Now, they might look exactly the same, but technically they're all individual permits and they're all slightly different. And what do they all require? A quick way, a big catch-all that folks throw around a lot is maximum extent practicable. It tasks communities, municipalities with managing stormwater discharges from their municipalities. And so that is that's the MS4 permit in a nutshell. Any questions before I move on to what it is made up of and how we comply with that? So the permit itself, it requires what we call 6 minimum measures. And they're over here around the, well, order is not working, but those, the 6 circles that are around the MS4 minimum requirements there. All of those are all permits are going to have those phase 1s, phase 2s. You're going to have these 3 additional requirements generally for all your phase 1s, and there may be 1 or 2 that might be attached onto a phase 2. It kind of goes back to that individual permit where each permit's going to fit the individual municipality. All of them, though, the 6 minimum measures are all those. We have programs in the city of Raleigh that address all of those programs. Some of those you may be more familiar with than others. I know the illicit discharge staff who are present here today, Zachary Poole, Steve and Jaltima who help out. You know, their predecessors have presented on the IDE program to you guys, and we have staff. You're familiar with the construction site runoff controls, the active construction unit or group that we have. Lauren Witherspoon. We have SCM inspections, post-construction runoff controls, plan review, pollution prevention, good housekeeping, which I'll this point forward reference as PPGH. That is just keeping our noses clean. That's inspecting our own facilities to make sure we're not contributing to stormwater pollution. And then we have some public outreach engagement and public involvement and participation. And you're familiar with public outreach and engagement with Carmela, who does the efforts annually. So all of this is driven by the permit behind the scenes. And these three here, we all also have programs that meet the requirements of those measures as well. In addition to those minimum measures, there's 3 additional permit requirements. You know, we have to have a plan to show how we're going to meet those permit requirements. It's called a stormwater management plan, or a SWAM. We are tasked with updating that SWAM annually, or at least reviewing it to see if it needs updates annually. We have to annually report to the state from that SWAM. So that SWAM tells us what we need to give to the state. We give that to the state every year by a certain date. And it also tasks us with a self-assessment annually. That self-assessment can be a voluntary exercise, or it can be a compliance audit. So we're going to show an example of one of each of those as we move through this. I just wanted to give an example here. So our MS4 permit is broken up by those 6 minimum measures. Here is an example of what one of those minimum measures is, the illicit discharge section. Each section of the permit will have BMPs, and then the BMP will have a measurable goal. And so, for instance, here you have to conduct dry weather flow inspections throughout the city. And it talks about, all right, here's a measurable goal to make sure you're achieving that. Make sure you have SOPs, make sure there's a way to follow up if there's an illicit discharge that's been found during those dry weather flow inspections. So then what we do from these permits, we're tasked with completing this. We then develop our stormwater management plan, our SWAMP, that says how we're going to do it. It builds out what we report on, how many inspections we complete a year, how many illicit discharges we find. And so there's accountability, and it tells a story about how to complete that test. And that is how the permit's set up through all those minimum requirements, all those permit requirements. It's just an example. Any questions on my quick intro to the MS4 program permit? All right, we'll go ahead and jump into where we were, I'd say August 2020. So it's, we're looking at about 2 years ago. We recognized we needed to, one, update our SWAM. We hadn't updated that during this permit cycle, which started in 2018. And we also recognized that the phase 2s were getting a lot of attention from the state. They were being audited pretty aggressively. So we needed to make sure we were on top of our game. And so I want to talk to you a little bit how we approached that. We went with an on-call consultant, Brandon Caldwell. We partnered with them to assist us with a gap analysis. I'm going to also a self-audit, voluntary self-audit. We want to identify where our compliance gaps are, areas for improvement. We would always joke, we always use the good, better, best. You know, if things were only good, we wanted to get the best. You know, let's get there. So it wasn't to necessarily apply blame or find problems. It was to go from good to better or better to best. So the first thing that Brandon Caldwell assisted us with was that gap analysis. We used, at the time, the only thing that was out, which was the phase 2 community DEQ audit template, which is a battery of questions, which y'all will see what the phase 1 looks like as we get through this. You said you had your phase 1 or phase 2 audit template we used. We also had Brandon Caldwell assist with developing questions for those components that aren't part of a phase 2 community permit. So they expanded on that audit template. The approach took about 4 to 6 months of working meetings, interviews with staff, work groups. We also interviewed 3 other phase 1 communities. And that was a really helpful exercise. We were able to see how they were meeting certain nuanced sections of the permit. We were able to share ideas on how we are exceeding requirements or maybe other strategies, more efficient strategies to meet compliance. It also just reinforced a good relationship that the phase ones are a tight community. They've been together for, since the 90s, if not before that. And so they're a tight community, and this only reinforced it. So everyone was gearing up. They're about the same times. I'd like to say we were one of the early ones to start this process though. So out of this project, we're working with Brown and Caldwell to work through this over the course of about 8 months. They had 3 deliverables. They assisted us with that gap analysis report, summarized all of our compliance gaps, and had recommendations on how we should best fill them. They also assisted with updating our swamp document, which truly was a complete overhaul. We went from a narrative form to more of a tabular form with schedules. And so you had fiscal year schedules, just a huge improvement from where we were. And some of y'all may recall, we did bring that forward to the commission and put it out for public comment at the beginning of 21, very early 2021. And then the third deliverable, which was kind of unique, and it was based on an old framework that the phase ones had, filled the void that was there. They developed a list of practices that went above and beyond. And they wanted everyone in the state to be aware of that. And it was a tool that had kind of died on the vine. It hadn't been used. So we tasked our consultant with helping us draft something up, which we call the sustainability strategy report, which it spelled out opportunities for every permit requirement on where we could exceed expectations. And really that was geared towards programs that were hitting all their marks, did not have any gaps. Instead of just sitting idle, there's the opportunity to exceed expectations. So moving on into our quick summary of that initial gap analysis. Strengths we have a lot of established programs in work groups. Some of this stuff has been going on 20 years. So we had good established programs for the most part across the board. We had good ordinances and authorities to pursue enforcement for SCM maintenance for illicit discharge. So we had a good framework for the enforcement side of these programs. Our construction inspection program, they have a delegated program already through the state. And so they are squared away because of that driver. They have an additional driver, so they're good. We had good engaged staff. Everyone was very helpful. Management, there was a lot of management buy-in, and kind of going with that, there was available funding. Some CIP funding was available to help pay for some of the consultant projects that we were able to utilize to complete this. And the other thing I wanted to compliment was the on-call consultant accessibility. That was when we realized where we were and what we needed to do on an aggressive time frame. We were able to pull from that on-call, pre-approved on-call consultant list and follow a shorter process to move forward with executing the contract, as opposed to starting from scratch with the RFQ and trying to get what we want. So all of these things were some positives on the front end. Some of the gaps, I already mentioned our swamp. It was in drastic need of an update. Our pollution prevention, good housekeeping, or PPGH. There were some individual site requirements for our high priority sites. We are actually at one right now, needed some work on some of their own individual stormwater plans. So that was a gap that was found. Our major outfall definition pretty much predated our permit definition. So we had to reconcile a lot of data and outfall information, and that was something that was overdue. And then most of the rest of the stuff listed on here is just refinement and documentation of what we already did. So, kind of the short answer here is we were in a good spot. We just had some clear items that we could do better. And that kind of gets us to the next part of presentation is here we have a list of 40+ compliance gaps. And so what did we do? If we're sitting here, we have an approved swamp now. We have a list of a gap report. And we're in the middle of 2021. So we have about 6 months to a supposed audit, possibly a year. So we have about a year of implementation. And so, what did we do at that time? First off, we all referenced the swamp. The swamp was our guiding document. It tied all the programs, not only to one document, but then back to the permit. So it was an easy, logical path from what you do day to day to what you should be doing tomorrow and what the justification was. It was a very clear path, and I think that's the true purpose of that swamp document. Providing the schedules as previously mentioned. Another thing that's important is that that swamp defines reporting metrics. And so knowing now, or knowing at that point, programs can go ahead and adjust what they're tracking or keeping track of so that it's easy to report to the state at the end of the year. So swamp was the first thing we focused on. Second thing was we developed work groups, and those work groups were based on program and roles and permit responsibility overlap. So if it's someone from education, it needs to work with the SDM group and also the IDE group. We make sure that team members are involved in the different work groups so that they can bring their expertise and tools to each work group. And then we'd have a group leader for each group that would then be able to report back to management about every 6 weeks. So these work groups would meet monthly, and management would meet maybe every 6 to 8 weeks to report on progress. And at the time, it's almost comical now. It was innovative at the time. This SharePoint was new at the time. Now everyone uses SharePoint. It's like Word now, but at the time, we had a list of we tracked all of our gaps in a SharePoint list. It could be live updated by anyone in the work groups. It really streamlined those 6 months of efforts because there was a lot of parallel work going on in across work groups. And so just a quick example, I pulled just one item out to show it as an example. You have the gaps spelled out directly how it was from the gap analysis, the recommendation provided by staff with help from Brown and Caldwell, the actions completed. So it's telling the story as we're developing this out. In this case, it's the swamp needed updating. So we have public comment period provided for communication for Brandon. It's telling the story of what we're doing. And then it says what's currently occurring and then the expected completion date. And then we even had a little red light, green light, yellow light, just to add emphasis, I guess. But management could quickly look through there, look at the yellows, look at the reds, see what's going on. And so it added that accountability, which is key for something like this, where you have so many moving parts. And I think I touched on all that. We had a very aggressive schedule. Once again, our target completion dates we were all shooting for the end of 2021. And I'm happy to say, I feel like we hit, of those 40+ gaps, all but a handful are still ongoing with effort. None of them were left untouched. So, and this slide sums it up. These are just, I pulled these from the top of my head. I didn't even have to go back to the SharePoint. Just, as soon as that gap analysis was done, and sometimes they got a head start when we hadn't even finalized the document. They started these projects. We talked about the major outfall definition, the database. We brought in a consultant to help us with our team to help with the database of major outfalls. That was completely overhauled, and it has downstream effects to, no pun intended, to the programs. The dry weather flow inspection program is contingent on the major outfall data set. So you have just improvement across programs and work groups with just, one initial effort. And I'm not going to go through all of these, but I'd say some of the big ones, we have a lot of plan development where it really helps centralize everything. I would say almost document what programs are doing to meet compliance. There were a lot of smaller SOPs and well, this is how we've always done it kind of culture. Now we have good, robust plans, good schedules, good schedules set up to maintain these documents as well. three other things I wanted to, these last three are probably some of the most important changes that took place. Our annual report template, it was similar to our swamp, which was mostly narrative. We have moved over to a tabular format, and we're still tweaking that, but we've improved our annual report template. We developed this citywide spill response guidance document. That sounds simple sitting in this room here. Citywide, right? Yeah, we just tell everybody this is what we do. Well, it took several months to work through that document, get buy-in from everyone from hazmat response from the fire department all the way down to somebody working at this facility who handles fuel spills across the street. And we got to a document that didn't cross anybody or conflict with anyone else's rules, met our permit requirements, and we can reference everything where we need to reference spill response, we can reference this document. And I feel like that was one of the big successes that came out of this effort. And then there was a reclassification of a staff position, and it's probably why I'm standing here today talking about MS4 tasks, to spend more time and try to organize some of this effort. So a lot was going on last year. Then we go into January, and it was a little quiet. When it's February, it was quiet because it's supposed to be NCDEQ audit season. And so we were preparing, we were still having touch and go meetings with our work groups and with management. And so we had one set up for April 25th. We were like, this is what we're gonna do. This is the pre-audit meeting. We're gonna talk about how we're gonna, and I hadn't even gotten through my introduction. And the NCDEQ sends over the email notification to Wayne. It said, here's your audit. And his text to the group was, NCDEQ's timing is impeccable, right there in our meeting. So our pre-audit meeting quickly turned into, let's knock this out. What's our schedule? So the format they took, instead of a week-long visit to the municipality and going through all the programs, they provided us a unique City of Raleigh Phase 1 audit template. They said, here is your 92 question audit. You complete the audit, submit it to us. In this case, it was 33 days, and that includes, if you count Easter Monday, Good Friday, my kids' spring break, all that's 33 days with those days included. They said, submitted by that end of I think it was end of April, end of May. It's the days that I'm counting. If you got 33 days to complete, submit it. So in that time, we had to have a pretty aggressive schedule to get through that. At first, we're like, great, we get to grade our own test, right? It's a lot harder than you think, because you have to almost play their role. How would you interpret this? You don't want to mislead, or you want to be truthful, you want to be accurate, you want to, and I found that was a challenge. It's too easy just to do yes, all the way down. You have to be able to justify it, and I'll show you how you have to justify every answer. So at first, it was almost celebration of the old tests, but by the end of it, it would have been helpful to know what they wanted in some instances. But real quick, you got 92 questions on that report. They included all of our minimum requirements except for TMDL. TMDL was not a section included in the template. And I know that there's a lot of work going on at the state level, developing and working with the EPA on exactly how they would like to move forward with that. So it makes a little bit of sense why it wasn't included in the audit, but all the other programs were. It also included 8 site visits, as you can see there. So we went to 2 municipal facilities, similar to like downtown remote. We did 2 SCM inspections. We went to a publicly owned or city owned and a privately owned, 2 active construction sites. Then my team conducted 2 outfall inspections, dry weather flow inspections, which example I touched on earlier. So a pretty aggressive schedule, as a theme here. Aggressive schedule for 2 years. We had two straight weeks of group meetings where we would meet virtually and in person, going through each permit section with that work group. How do you, and it wasn't the first time we've come across these questions, but it's the first time we had to document like we did here. And And I'll show an example of that. So after those first 2 weeks of group meetings, we moved into a 1 full week of site visits. At that point, we had about 2 weeks left. We allowed our consultant to review and provide some suggested edits, which was helpful to have another set of eyes on there. And as what came out of it is we generated a supporting document list of over 24 documents that went everything, what started at the swamp, all the way down to an SOP document that talked about how we conduct IDD inspections. Along with the 8 site visits with the inspection reports, all the documentation that you would provide if an auditor was there in person. It was certified, signed by the delegated authority, which in this case is Wayne, and submitted electronically through this new thing called SharePoint. We are on this. But results. So out of those 92 questions, 83 yes. We feel really confident on those 83 yeses. We had 5 partials. And they were, a lot of those, the best way to sum those up is that we are currently doing that, but we were unable to concisely point to documentation that, hey, this is where it's documented that we're doing that. And I'll show you an example of one of those. And then there was 0 no's, which I think is the biggest victory there. And then 4 NA's, which obviously are not applicable to us. So this is this is one of the 92 questions. This is what it looks like. And I purposely picked one of those 5 partials. So I'm not hiding anything. I want to show you an easy one. I want to show you one that has a good comment here. So we have, you have the permit reference. First off, you have the minimum measure. You have that there. It's in the SCM world. You have the permit reference, what they're looking for. If we're doing that, which we said partial, and then the documents that we're referencing. So here we're referencing where we reference it in, looks like I already forgot, it's the annual report of the swamp, but then we have the UDO reference. We have some literature on our website there, but that all corresponds with this list of documents. So every question, we have a list of applicable documents that support our answer. And then for ones that needed clarification, we would have our 2 or 3 sentences telling the story about, hey, this is where we are. This is why we felt like a partial was fair. In this case, one of the partials was DOT projects. Do we use DOT rules when we when we plan to review DOT projects? And so, yes, we do. An example would be looking at any of the DOT projects that plan review has reviewed and approved. Look at the comments, but we didn't have it in our SOP and it was not in our UDO. So we said partial, small improvement we can make. So I feel like this is a good example. It embodies what each question looked like, the task that was associated with each question, but it also shows, I think, how truthful we were here and how we approached it. Once again, our document list. And so I wanted to kind of end on our partials, which is not the place I'd like to end on. I like to end on something positive, but here's our 5 partials. And I can quickly kind of go over what we're doing on all of these, or we're already doing to go from good to better. The annual reporting, once again, we had revamped our annual report to a tabular form. So we were all narrative. We went all tabular. Maybe we need to spend a little bit more. We have a little bit more narrative. So we're actively engaged as we're updating our swamp for this year. They're going to also, we have a consultant that's going to assist with guiding us and helping us update our annual report templates. We're talking fine-tuned changes, not overhauls. Post-construction site runoff controls, I've already really touched on that on the DOT standard one. The other one, the SNN or SCM, O&M maintenance manuals. There were a couple items in there where it talks about if they're legally enforceable and what's the process for revising an O&M at post-approval. And we have historically been able to funnel them through different paths as the rare occurrence happen, upon the rare occurrence. We have things set in stone in SOP and a plan in videos saying how that works. So My understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, Wayne, but I understand plan review staff are working with city attorney's office to handle that first one, legally enforceable acknowledgement of the responsible party of an O&M maintenance, pretty much agreement for an SCM. And then the modification, that's a simple SOP update on the plan review side, which is, I'm working with Sally Hoyt to address. Similar approach was constructed to NCDOT standards. Yeah. The PPGH, Good Housekeeping, the city-owned SCMs, that program has grown tremendously in the last 2 years. And so we've added 2 staff members. We are developing SLAs for all of our city-owned SCMs. It's just it's a slog to get through all that. And so we felt that was a partial because it's not a completed program yet. And so a lot of credit to that group. That group has done a tremendous amount of work in a short amount of time, but there's still continual improvement until we can honestly say, hey, we're a yes for this question.
Hey, Justin, just want to do a time check. We're at time now, so just want to give 5 minutes for you to wrap up
Yes,
and then any questions.
Thank you for that. And this is good time. This is my last slide. So we've completed our audit, submitted it on time. NCDOT response, they said they're going to come back for a 1 to 2 day visit to review 1 or 2 programs. We have not heard anything yet. We anticipate hearing something in the near future. And next steps, what you guys will see next is that we are currently updating our swamp. We hope to bring a revised swamp we're talking small changes, nothing like before, to the commission to then put out for public comment, hopefully at the August meeting. So that is our goal. It is an aggressive goal, but a goal, our schedule. And along with that, you'll see an updated annual report template. And Chair, appreciate the time check, and I will take any and all questions. And I also have my staff here that are extremely valuable to the team here and helping us make all this happen. So.
Any questions for Justin?
Thanks for the presentation. I was just curious who the main contact in DEQ lead.
So it was Jeanette Powell. It still is Jeanette Powell. She announced just yesterday, I want to say that we got word that she's retiring at the end of this month. So Jeanette Powell is.
And how frequently do they do one of these?
The audit?
Yeah.
The last audit was 2012. Might have been 2012, 2013. Ideally, they will do it right with each permit cycle, which is 5 years.
Right.
And per the permit language, we either have to do a self audit or a compliance audit, which they do annually. So that's one of the things that has come out of that exercise. We are good for the last 2 years. We hope to be good for the next 5 years in doing it internally. So that schedule is a little more relaxed.
I have a question. And I know we're almost we're at the time to pass. The illicit discharge that the Cherry Sanford building allegedly did in 2020, does that feature in this self-audit since it's federal? Is it outside? And is there an update on that? You can give the update at another time, but.
Sure. My understanding, I know Wayne, you probably had the most recent information on it, is that it was determined that there was not an illicit discharge. Was the latest I heard. But we're more than happy, Wayne, if you had anything, or I'm more happy to share any other information. Yeah.
So that was a federal building, so it fell under the federal regulatory authority. We did support EPA's investigative efforts with site visits and personnel to support that. The conclusion was that there was not an illicit discharge that was occurring anytime in the recent past.
Been like 40 years past?
No, I don't think they could go back that far with any certainty. There had been some construction revisions and had been done, I want to say maybe 10 years ago, that I think had raised some questions as to whether what was shown on the plans was not consistent with what was in actuality, and they actually had to go into the walls to try to confirm, different piping. But I guess to your point, that type of analysis of illicit discharge, if it were not a federal building, would fall under the authority of this permit with other types of buildings and other types of illicit discharges that could occur. So that is an example of the type of evaluation that we would do. That one was just a federal building, so it wasn't our authority, it was federal authority. Okay.
Sorry, Javon, if I misinterpreted the question there. So, yeah, that is it would be a higher profile example than what we deal with on a daily basis. And Zachary Poole is here and he can attest to, we receive calls from kitchen grease being poured into a drain all the way to private sanitary sewer flows to public or Raleigh water now, contacting us with several thousand gallons of sanitary sewer flows. So very robust program that dates back a long time. One of our most robust of the MS4 set of programs.
Thanks so much, Justin.
Can I just make one quick close? I just want to commend Justin for leading this very, as you can see, very complex, very tight schedule, a lot of coordination of multiple teams internally within the storm division. His group was a big part of that, Stephen and Zachary, but really everyone in the stormwater program participated. And then it also required a lot of coordination with other departments, like this is transportation. And there are multiple facilities that fall under this program where we are really the regulatory authority overseeing other departments' work. So it's complex coordination. Justin and his team did an excellent job, and I feel really good about the results. And I do think we were probably really hard on ourselves in some of those partials, but that's where we wanted it. We wanted to do the best job possible in serving our community, protecting water quality, which is what this is all about. So nice job, Justin and the team.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you, everyone.
I invite Scott forward, and you have the total 25 minutes. So you're
Thank you. Not putting pressure on Scott.
You have to have your allotted time.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to see you all. We're back talking about stormwater funding. We were with you just a few months ago. We were talking mainly about internal funding the last time, local funding. And thank you again for your support for us and the local funding. Yourselves, the city council, and the entire community really funds us and provides us the ability to do all the great work that Justin just highlighted. Fantastic job, Justin and team. Thank you for that. Just to echo Wayne's remarks there. Today, we're going to talk with you about, there's really record levels of state, federal funding that's available. And so we're putting a plan together. We have a team here. I'm going to join us as our fiscal manager, Mark Van Auken, stormwater program manager, practice manager, Arcadis, to a presentation. We're putting a framework plan together to pursue these state and federal grant opportunities. This is really giving us a chance to leverage our local funding. Our 10-year capital plan right now is about $150 million. We have about another $600 million in the backlog that we've identified. So there's lots of needs out there, lots of opportunities. We want to leverage our local dollars that you and the community provide for us, hopefully bringing some state, federal grants to support what we're doing here as best we can. We have received grants in years past, and we have recently applied for one here just a few months ago. And so we're going to talk about that and talk about the plan that we're putting forward. Javier, again, you all have met Javier briefly. Has been with us now almost just about a year. Completed the first budget process and really helping us tremendously. So again, welcome. Seems like you just started. Thank you to all. You're doing a great job. Over to you and then to Mark.
Yeah,
thank you, Commission.
I appreciate it. Yeah, quickly introduce myself. I've been with the city of Raleigh for a year now, fiscal manager for stormwater division. Relocated a little bit about me, relocated from South Florida a year and a half ago. So new to the city and obviously new to city of Raleigh Stormwater. A little bit of, like Scott was saying, working closely with him and Wayne and the entire team, along with Mark and Arcadis on these additional funding resources that are out there. And that's about the Mark. And
Thank you.
Take over the show. Thanks, I appreciate it. I will say I've got some good news and bad news. This is gonna be chock full of great information you're gonna enjoy. However, when I timed it at home, it was like 40 minutes. So I'm gonna give you the abbreviated version of that's just so you know.
Quick question, where is that? Walnut Creek?
That is, it's Rose Lane. Yeah,
I
we
haven't seen it.
that's good. That's, well, we got a few more other pictures as well. Uh-oh. There we go. I wasn't expecting that to disappear. So our contract for working with funding services for the city covers three main items. We're helping them with the funding strategy. We're going to be working with them on cross-department funding coordination. But the stormwater division is really taking care of that. And the biggest part of our project is supposed to be helping with the application development for funding for the fiscal year 2022. By the time our contract got developed, we had already missed some of the key big funding opportunities. So we're really in the process of revising this to be able to assist the city through what will be 2022 and probably some of the fiscal year 2023 funding as well. To date, we've been focused, which is really just primarily 2022. We've been focused at evaluating the existing programs that the city has right now, really putting together a summary of all of the available federal, state, local funding that's out there that we can then identify and align with the CIP program that Scott just mentioned. And then we developed a technical memorandum that was provided to everyone here for SMAC that, along with this presentation that has some of the information. We were pretty close to being finished with that. We just have to do the final selection of the projects, but we're pretty much done, which is great. For the tech memo, like I say, we're looking at the city's funding information, assessing those funding sources. We're trying to provide some simple guides as part of the overall tech memo. And so we have a table that simplifies and aligns the CIPs with the six types of projects they have within the CIP document right now. So they can go through and look and say, we've got a stormwater control measure dam project that's coming up. What type of funding sources are there out there that generally are applied, that have funding that can be applied to those projects? So we're trying to create some simplified guide information for them. And then, of course, helping with the next steps for how we're going to be pursuing some of the funding for projects. So a quick summary, and we'll probably, since I'm sure you're probably familiar with the Stormwater Division CIP projects, they have a prioritization model that they use to score their CIPs, which has been great. Those look at safety, water quality, regulatory, and other issues. That, as Scott mentioned, they have been pursuing funding in the past. They have Justin's gone. I was to say, Justin was talking about all the acronyms that they use within the MS4 program. We have tons of acronyms for the different funding agencies. So FEMA, which I'm hopefully you're familiar with, has a hazard mitigation grant program. That is disaster dependent. And so the city has been able to get some property buyouts for Capitol Boulevard related to that. The Clean Water State Revolving Fund, the next on the list, is an EPA related funding source that's water quality based that kind of flows from US EPA down to the states and is administered. They have submitted a low interest loan for the Upper Longview Lake Stream Restoration Project for that. North Carolina has a Land and Water Fund that used to be the Clean Water Management Fund. And then so they've done a great job of getting funding for projects from that source in the past. And I have a current application for $1 million for the Upper Durham Lake Wetlands Project. They've been successful with 319 grants, which are non-point source related grants for water quality related projects. And also they've submitted for funding through the City of Raleigh's American Rescue Plan Act funding. If you're familiar with that, it was a $1.9 trillion plan that was authorized at the end of last year. It was very unique because they actually provided money to the state of North Carolina, as well as to Wake County, as well as the city of Raleigh. And so there are opportunities for getting funding at each of those levels, which I'll get into in just a little bit. I think it's good. I think I'm hitting the one. Thanks. Matt actually coached me back there. The person I'm managing this screen up already. Perfect. So yeah, there's a range of different funding sources that are out there. And so we've tried to provide some general guidance for each one of these. For example, for FEMA, Their focus is really on water quantity, so flooding related ones. And so when we're trying to align that with projects that are in the CIP, we're looking for those that are flooding projects. They are disaster dependent. They also have funding programs like the BRIC, which is the Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities Program, that is on an annual basis, has a significant amount of money, very popular right now. So we have a range of funding sources. HUD has a couple of CDBG related funding that's tied to stormwater. And again, those are both disaster related, the mitigation one and the community enhancement one. EPA is primarily has a range of funding sources from the Clean Water State Revolving Fund 319 grants. Those are primarily water quality focused projects, so they tie to stream restoration, green stormwater infrastructure type projects. The Natural Resources Conservation Service is more of watershed protection, land conservation type projects. So if we're looking at some of the lake preservations, that might be a good fit for some of those projects. The Army Corps of Engineers is really looking at funding for major riparian corridor type improvements. So if we're looking at a big program in Walnut Creek or something, you might want to look at that as a potential option. The U.S. Department of Transportation, the Federal Highway Administration, both have a lot of new funding that's really targeting now resilience, stormwater management as part of those projects. So there's a good opportunity. That really hasn't been an area I'd say that we've really considered a lot in the past, but I think that there's some projects especially that we think, especially if they don't have a lot of structures that are impacted by flooding, if it's more roadway or if it's a bridge related one, that we can really target some of the DOT funding. They even have those that are looking at permeable pavement for funding or heat island effect type projects for funding. So there's a lot of opportunities, I think, on the DOT side. There's other federal funding sources, state funding sources, local, and earmarks is one that I know Wayne was interested in. On the federal side, they really haven't had earmarks for the last, I would say, about 10 years. And just within the 2022 omnibus bill, there was $10 billion in earmarks. And even for the state American Rescue Plan Act funding has, I think it's over $10 million worth of earmarks that were included as part of that. So it's coming back around again. So it's something that we want to be paying attention to as we look at potential sources. So for the two really big ones that are the federal funding sources outside of those traditional programs, we have the American Rescue Plan Act, $1.9 trillion. It evolved out of the COVID-19 pandemic response. As I mentioned, it has funding available at the state, county, and local level. Projects can address both water quantity and water quality, and they have fairly low standards in terms of the requirements that need to be met. It's actually, the funds are administered by the Treasury Department, so they don't have to go through a lot of the benefit cost analysis for those. So that is one that we're certainly looking at. Also, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, which is also called the Infrastructure and Investment Jobs Act, has a lot of both new funding as well as significant funding that's been added on to existing programs. It really includes the gamut from transportation to utility, water, sewer, stormwater to environmental related projects for funding. And it's interesting that a lot of those programs have a focus on low to moderate income housing, disadvantaged areas, and that really ties in well with the city's goal, which is to try to consider equity and really addressing drainage issues in underserved areas. So I think that one is another, when we're looking at potential funding sources, that will tie in nicely with some of the projects that we're looking at. This was when I mentioned earlier about trying to develop a simple little chart that we could use. This is a portion of a table that we have the city's 6 types of CIPs listed on top of the page, which includes water quality, neighborhood projects, lake preservation, and then all the different funding sources, at least the primary funding sources that come from the different agencies. And just to provide a little guide, so if we're looking for a stormwater control measure or dam project funding, FEMA and HUD don't really, they're more focused on water quantity than water quality. I understand FEMA has their own dam safety related funding, but primarily for funding sources, they don't typically fund water quality, whereas EPA, most of their programs really look at water quality. So this is just one table that's in the tech memo that provides a simple guidance for the staff when they want to go and look at what are the potential funding sources that we could be considering. We're also in the process of developing a Power BI application. So if Wayne is in his office and he wants to see what are the upcoming dates for the applications for a range of funding sources, how many are we actually applying for, and what is the total amount of that, and what is the match requirement for the city? Those are the type of things that we want to be able to put in the Power BI, provide a simple kind of one-stop dashboard that would then that the staff can get access to be able to find out that type of information, just to make it a little easier to manage these places, because there is so much funding that's out there right now. So some of the recommendations that have come out of our tech memo is we want to try to integrate and build on the existing work. There's been a number of studies that have already been done. And so we want to try to, and really even not only from the stormwater division, from other departments. And so we really want to be trying to build on some of that existing work as we are developing and preparing for the applications. We want to plan for flexible adaptation over time. Just today, there was a release from the North Carolina Land and Water Fund of a new $15 million funding for water quality resilience projects. And so these tend to come out, and there's also of the bipartisan infrastructure law, there's still NOFOs that are being released for funding, authorizing that funding for programs. And so there's a lot of stuff that's going on it seems like a daily or at least a weekly basis for funding that we're trying to make sure that we're tracking and being able to adapt with those. We want to make sure again that we're looking at equity and fairness when we're considering these projects, that we're not just putting projects that are benefiting just a small portion of the community. We want to make sure that we're looking at equity and making sure that there's projects that can address low to moderate income areas. We want to focus on some of the community-driven connection solutions. A lot of times when we look at drainage improvement projects, we're just focused on solving those problems by putting in pipes or putting in some stormwater control measures. But we want to try to look at projects, I think, a little bit more holistically. So if we have an opportunity for doing a bikeway pedway as part of a stormwater conveyance layer type project, and we can consider that. We want to make sure that we're looking at projects more holistically and where we might have opportunities for community enhancements. We want to coordinate with and align with other agencies, not only from the city itself, but if there is a state or federal program or other, even a local watershed group or something that has a program that's out there that it makes sense to team with, we certainly want to consider that. We want to look at multifunctional resilience solutions. I said a lot of the funding that's out there right now is targeted towards resilience as one of the keys that they're looking at, that they're not really giving you money just to replace what's out there. They want to look at making improvements so we can be able to withstand larger storms. And so we want to make sure that our resilience, our infrastructure is more resilient. And then also, if we want to ground the solutions in data, like I said, there's been a lot of reports and other information that's been gathered to this point. We want to make sure that we're utilizing whatever's available to us to inform the projects that we're moving forward with. Some of the recommended projects I want to highlight real quick. How am I doing on time?
10 minutes, including questions.
10 minutes including questions. All right, well, I'll probably zip through these a little bit quicker then. We have a number, or at least two primary lake preservation projects, Eastgate Lake Dam, Upper Durham Lake Wetland Preservation. Both are over $2 million. They're targeted in the near future, 2023, 2024. And so we're looking at funding options for them. The Upper Durham Lake projects has already been, an application has been submitted for a land and water fund grant right now, but there, like I said, there's a range of different funding sources that are out there. We're just trying to figure out the best, whether we have multiple funding or one type project. And there's a lot of other dam projects that are out there. And if we see certain elements that we think are may have a good chance of being funded for those projects, if they happen to be in a low moderate income area or benefit certain areas, we're going to consider those. But the top two are the ones I think are the top of the list right now. For the Rocky Branch at Dix Park, that one is really a water quality focused project. So we're looking at the funding sources like the Land and Water Fund, Clean Water State Revolving Fund that have a lot of funding is really geared towards water quality projects. For stream restoration, like I say, those are traditionally pretty large type projects, and both of the Walnut Creek and Capitol Boulevard are kind of in the
down the road a little bit, if you look at the years when those are targeted for funding. And so not only are we looking at potential, the American Rescue Plan Act funding, Clean Water City Revolving funding, but even maybe some Army Corps of Engineer funding, if we're looking at, major projects that we're looking at significant funding, we want to make sure that we're looking at those. There are a lot of neighborhood projects that we, would like to target. Kingsborough Estates, Glenbrook Avenue are ones that there's some national, Fish and Wildlife Service grants that are available. A lot of funding that targets low to moderate income housing areas that we want to be considering for some of these projects. Dana Drive and Rose Lane, I'd say are a couple of bigger ones. Rose Lane especially, we were very close for having the opportunity to pursue a RAISE grant, which is funded by the Department of Transportation. I always forget the acronym stands, but sustainability and equity are the S and E part of it, I can tell you that. Unfortunately, they changed the minimum requirements for what you needed to do for submitted for funding. So we thought it was going to be a great project, and then we had to kind of hold off on that one. But there is, like I say, a lot of funding of areas where the city has already submitted for funding for the stormwater division and other opportunities as well. There's also some other programs that are on the CIP list that are not within the 6 primary CIP categories, like early warning system implementation. That's something that there's actually some individual technical type funding that's out there that comes from USEPA as well as USGS. And there's even on the FEMA's Hazard Mitigation Grant Program tied to emergency generators that actually have a early warning system component that you can get funding through that. So if there's a natural disaster, that's an opportunity. There's also the Raleigh Rainwater Rewards Program that we are looking at trying to get some additional funding for that. So real quick, I think this will just take up the last couple minutes. For our recommendations right now, we want to try to start the process of making sure that we are gathering information on project benefits, percentage of low and moderate income housing, anything that we can help develop the narrative and have information about these projects. So we can quickly go and develop applications, because there's a lot of information that's very similar from application to application. So being able to have a lot of those building blocks that are already developed for them gives us a lot more flexibility and be able to respond much quicker when it comes to looking at funding projects. We want to consider that the net water funds, the city's had great success with that for a lot of the water quality related projects. Looking at getting green infrastructure grants through the Clean Water State Revolving Fund. Historically, 95% of the Clean Water State Revolving Funds have gone towards sanitary and not stormwater projects. They're trying to make a little difference in that now with having more stormwater funded projects. So we're trying to keep an eye on that and be reasonable about if we think we've got a good chance of pursuing funding there or not. Golden Leaf Foundation, which is a more local foundation, and Kevin was just telling me that they say they have lots of money that they're willing to give. So we're going to look into that in a little bit more detail, but certainly something to consider. And also, I know the city, one thing that we're looking at that was requested specifically in our contract was looking at some of the property buyouts. And there's a couple of sources available that really target property buyouts that we think we can look at in more detail. And finally, the next steps that we're looking at doing, we can say we're working right now collectively to try to identify the high probability projects that we think we have the best chance of winning funding for, trying to then set up a well in advance, at least several months in advance of when the deadlines are coming up, so we can make sure that we can confidently and develop a really robust and compelling application to be able to win the funding, gather additional information. We want to be enhancing the relationships with the state regulatory staffs, whether that's Bob Barker at Hazard Mitigation Grant Program, with King Riggin, that's that BRIC program. We want to be able to talk with them and find out what the key factors are. And they're usually very good about sharing information. By saying that we're going to be preparing applications for the top priority projects. And for you, the ask is, we want you to be able to help us out, provide guidance with whatever you think is important from your perspective on this. And we'll keep you appraised as we are developing and submitting applications.
I'm confident we'll be very successful. So thank you for the opportunity for presenting, and I have left 1 minute for questions. Hopefully we'll have a little bit more than that, but thank you very much.
Any questions for Mark?
Yeah, question more for, maybe for city staff, but just. How is this, having the relationship with parks and stormwater, having just completed the project, the cross pollination, so how does this start to benefit, how are other departments, you're building a heck of a database, a heck of a resource, how are you then cross-referencing the CIP's demands from other places, in transportation and parks and stuff like that? Is that already built in, or is that the next layer?
Yeah, I can dig it. That's already built into a lot of these projects that we've already, as part of the CIP process, coordinated, like a couple of examples. You saw the Dick's Park one, obviously.
Yeah.
That's a parks-driven project that we have an important component of. Rose Lane is another example. That's gonna be our lead, but have heavy transportation components. So we're working with transportation planning. And, you know, Mark mentioned like that raised grant. The city transportation had already submitted another Wet Street project for that. So we didn't want to duplicate effort or compete against ourselves, but we are reaching out cross-departmental as appropriate to, you know, to coordinate pursuits and look for areas for joint project development as well.
And I guess that's the other thing, is how does this, you're working for stormwater, and how does the city, I mean, how do you ensure that? I mean, I don't know, how does the city do this efficiently? So that somebody in parks is not building a database and it's just sharing it every once in a while. How are you doing it in a way that's kind of a centralized, or is it not even to be centralized?
I think it could be. I think it's a fair question, Graham. There's not a centralized, well, let me take that back. There is a city grants committee that does help centralize, all of the pursuits. So before we officially submit an application, we have to go before that committee, get their approval, get their feedback. Is this appropriate investment of our resources to do the application? And is it consistent with what they're hearing from other departments? So there is that process. Even early on before the planning, though, it does rely on cross-department coordination and discussions to get to that strategy, that strategic point. But I think it's a good comment.
Right, one thing to add to that, Graham, I think one of the goals that I say about developing some of those building blocks of that, having a benefit cost analysis already prepared, having a narrative for these projects already prepared, it does allow the city more time to be able to coordinate between different departments, just to, if there's an opportunity, because we can identify, say, you know, there's a real good I wish we had a parks component to this project because it would get us a lot more points for that. And that's where we allow ourselves then enough time to be able to have discussions, to be able to pull that information in, and I say, and build that robust type compelling storyline, which really is a lot of the funding now. It's really just developing that story, and they usually do get additional points when you have multiple departments or multiple entities that are teaming together. So I think that's an important component of anything that we're looking at.
Yeah, and quickly speaking on that, apart from us identifying the projects, they also reach out to us. Speaking of that, today I received an email that I'm interested in our matrix and our spreadsheet that we're working with them. So they're reaching out, seeing what opportunities are out there, if they can tie with their projects, and then also work with us on those projects and on those funds.
So I read the memo and for the Dick's, Rocky Branch, it had $750 million, but your slide has 50 million. So which one is correct?
The 50 was just the stormwater.
Yeah, just, I'm sorry, stormwater component, yeah, we mislabeled the project and project costs to the stormwater component, so it's been corrected now.
Okay, all right, because that way you
You're very.
you know, the other question I have, just to be honest, I read the material and I saw the amount of money going to Dick's Park and Rocky Branch. It appeared to me that the city was putting aesthetics over equity. Because just in my perusing, I could not figure out why almost 5 times as much money was going to Rocky Branch and Dick's Park which really does not have any impact on, people's property downstream. And an equal amount of money was not being placed in historically, underinvested areas. Now, perhaps my reading was wrong, and you can correct me on that. But I just did not quite understand why so much was going to Dick's Park, other than I know this is an important, project, for the current elected administration. So would you say I was wrong in my reading, or do I need to better educate myself?
I'll take that.
Yeah.
So I think it's a fair point. Right now, we are, reflecting the city's priorities in CIP and moving forward. And as you said, that is a project that the city has expressed importance in. That $50 million is a little bit misleading in that that also includes a lot of hazardous waste remediation associated with that stream. You may be familiar, there's old landfills and a lot of remediation that make that a more costly stream restoration project than a traditional project, as well as the uses of park and potentially, keep public being right there on that site requires additional levels of remediation. But there's a lot of other projects, and that's the type of feedback that the commission can help provide us, especially from a stormwater perspective, is where we should be focusing our priorities in terms of pursuing funding. We want to leverage our existing funding as well as possible. That was a big objective of doing this. We want to be strategic. But we also want to be focused and make sure that we're looking at the high probability grants, where we're spending our effort to get the best return on that investment. And that's certainly the type of feedback that we welcome.
And Wayne, just to add to that, in commission, the 50 million is a citywide number. Our stormwater contribution is maybe 5 million, ish or so. I don't know exactly. It was 50 is the entire project portion. Our portion is a modest portion of that. It certainly is not a majority of our stormwater portfolio.
And that's probably a 30-year multi-phase development costs of that element. That's not one CIP that's in the next 10 years. We don't have anything on our 10-year CIP for that. Okay. Just so you know, it's just something that we put on the radar as something that may be qualified for some of the funding sources that we would be pursuing.
Currently, the largest in our 10-year plan right now is the Roseland Walden project.
Right.
$12 to $15 million estimate. That's our largest one. David's the largest as well. And we're contributing, planning over time to support the Dix project at the right branch, but it is just really the contribution towards that large scale major city project.
Right, and I will reiterate that a lot of especially the federal funding that's out there does have, it is weighted towards those more to benefit the historically disadvantaged areas. So that's kind of built in. And so the city and Scott can get more into how the scoring thing works, but when they go through and do all that with the CIP, we're now then taking those projects, they kind of go into this is a pool that we'd like to be able to move forward with, and then they get reevaluated based on what the funding potential is for winning those projects. And so it may end up being one that is very focused on equity, or we might have a funding source that it's some other project component that it raises the chance of getting selected. And as Wayne was mentioning, a large part of our goal is to try to take the existing money that's there and be able to use that for matches and get as much funding as we can so we can get more of these projects implemented. And we want to try to get, as many as we can to benefit as many people as we can.
Just to build on some of the Reverend Taylor's comments, I've got real concerns about that Rocky Branch project too. It's a wide expenditure of money to try to restore that stream. That's a challenge stream. I'm not sure you can have a good fix. How much money we want to throw at it. And the other common question is, we support a pretty robust organization model that Scott's been developed, but I'm not sure how much of the component of equity is involved with that. And that's something, again, we've noticed that we need to work upon it as a stormwater issue. And the question is that model incorporating that equity act to be modified to incorporate more equity so we get a better distribution of these prioritized projects and how that's going to work. So I think that's our biggest role is how to prioritize the projects and how we get involved with that as a stormwater commission.
Exactly. We're aggressive, working with our staff team, with the inclusion team, with you all have had some discussions with us. We're seeking to integrate that within our prioritization model. The city is just beginning discussions around making it operational. One tool that's being contemplated is a social equity index, perhaps. So the thought is, how could that apply to our stormwater projects? We would prioritize as largely as we do today, is on flooding, or safety flooding, or quality, regulatory compliance, all the things that are sort of technical in nature. But then any adjustment for equity to advance these equity goals would be applied to them. So we're working on that very aggressively, and we're proud of our efforts there, and I'm going to hopefully lead those discussions and be a part of those discussions. Certainly, we're following our city goals in that, and seeking to apply that to stormwater, make it operational. Is kind of what we're trying to do. And, so currently, that's not in our model. We're working to make it part of our model for our next set of prioritizations and we can adjust it for that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The commission want to apologize that we're over by so much. Just one matter of business. So, city council typically takes a pause in July. They don't meet, and Matt has followed that. So the question is, do we want to meet in July or take a pause and have our next meeting in August?
My perspective is unless we have something we know we have to deal with in July to follow council's meeting, go ahead and take a break. A little bit.
Yeah, July would be, we've been doing our drainage assistance and our three projects quarterly. So July would be the next time we would do that. But as the chairman explained, the city council takes a break. They do not have their second meeting in July nor their first meeting in August. So even if the commission acted on those projects at a July meeting, they would not, the earliest they can go to council would be the end of August or early September, depending on the agenda. So really, even if you skipped a meeting, it would not delay action on any of those projects that you would be reviewing. So I think traditionally that's part of the reason why that recess has been taken kind of coordinated with the city council recess. Okay. But it's purely up to the commission and the staff is glad to hear to support you. Okay.
Then may I have a motion, that the next SMAC meeting is August?
I would make a motion that we postpone or skip the July meeting and have our next meeting in August.
Okay, Mark, and then, David, second, all in favor, raise your hand, say it. Any opposition? All right, any other business? May I have a motion to adjourn? Mark, any second? So be it. Y'all enjoy the rest of your evening. Thanks.